So back in 2008, the National Mint of Chile produced millions of coins with this one, like tiny but completely catastrophic flaw.
Oh, right. The typo.
Yeah, the typo. They literally spelled the name of their own country wrong. CHIIE instead of CHILE.
Which is wild.
Right. I mean, you would assume a sovereign nation misspelling its own name on legal tender would trigger, like, a financial panic. Or at least a massive government recall, right?
You'd think so, yeah.
But instead, the government just kind of shrugged. They left the typo in circulation, and those 9-cent coins instantly became these hoarded collector's items.
Which, completely shatters the illusion of what we collectively believe money to be.
Totally.
Because we tend to view currency as this rigid, serious, immutable institution. But the story of the Chilean peso really proves that money is highly malleable.
It really is.
It's a real-time physical record of human error, political upheaval, and just massive macroeconomic turbulence.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking a really comprehensive stack of sources, mostly centered on this incredibly detailed Wikipedia overview, and we are unpacking the story of the Chilean peso.
It's a fascinating story.
It really is. So whether you are, prepping for a business trip to Santiago, or maybe you're tracking South American markets, or you just love a good rabbit hole into how global economics actually function under pressure, you're in the right place.
Absolutely.
We're basically going to explore the peso as a mirror for Chile itself.
And just to establish our baseline parameters here, the current peso is the official currency of Chile. You will see it symbolized by the standard dollar sign, or CLP, to distinguish it globally.
Right.
And as of July 2024, it was trading around 940 pesos to $1.
But we are pushing way beyond the exchange rate today. We're looking at how inflation literally vaporized entire categories of coins.
Literally wiped them out.
Wiped them out. And we'll get into how the global copper market and domestic elections dictate the actual cash in a Chilean's pocket. Plus, the sheer mechanics behind a central bank throwing a $25 billion anchor to stop a currency from crashing.
But before we can analyze those massive global forces, we really have to look at the anatomy of the money itself.
The physical stuff.
Exactly. We need to examine how inflation acts as this invisible physical force that shapes what people actually carry in their wallets.
So let's trace this back to 1975, which is when the current iteration of the peso was introduced. It replaced the previous currency, which was the escudo.
Right.
And the transition, it didn't exactly happen smoothly. It was executed at this staggering rate of 1 peso to 1,000 escudos.
Let's contextualize what that actually means, because chopping 3 zeros off a national currency, what does that feel like on the ground?
It sounds chaotic.
It is. When a government is forced to execute a 1 to 1,000 currency swap, it means the underlying economy is running so incredibly hot that everyday math has just become unmanageable.
Like you can't even calculate prices anymore.
Exactly. Citizens are carrying these thick stacks of bills just to purchase a loaf of bread. So the government hits the reset button purely to make commerce mathematically functional again.
And if a government hits that reset button to stabilize the system, you naturally expect the new money to hold its shape, right?
You would hope so.
Right. So they rolled out this new peso and divided it into 100 centavos. But the sources show that less than a decade later, by 1983, inflation had already rendered those centavos completely obsolete.
Yeah, they couldn't purchase a single good or service.
Nothing. And by 1996, the centavo was officially dead. The government just stopped recognizing it as a subdivision.
Well, think about the physical mechanics of minting money. The state has to purchase raw metal, they have to operate these massive stamping machines, and then physically distribute the coins.
Right, which all costs money.
Exactly. When systemic inflation drives the cost of basic goods up, the purchasing power of the smallest denomination drops to absolutely zero. So very quickly, the raw metal and the manufacturing process cost the government significantly more than the face value of the coin itself. The state is essentially burning money to make money.
Which makes pure mathematical sense to just stop production. And this dynamic, it didn't just end in the 90s?
No, not at all.
Fast forward to 2017, and the Chilean mint gave up on the 1 and 5 peso coins entirely. Production ceased, and the public was actually instructed to bring their jars of these low-value coins directly to the mint to swap them for larger bills.
And this structural change forced a completely new operational reality for commercial entities. In late 2017, Chile instituted a mandatory rounding rule for cash payments.
Right, the rounding rule.
Yeah, if a total ends in 1 through 5 pesos, the cashier rounds down. If it ends in 6 through 9, they round up.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. Wait, does this apply across the board? Like if I swipe a credit card for an exact amount, am I getting rounded up to the nearest 10?
No, and that is a really crucial distinction. Electronic transactions, so credit cards, bank transfers, checks, those remain exact to the single peso. The rounding only applies to physical cash.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it creates this fascinating bifurcated system where the physical money supply operates on a slightly different mathematical reality than the digital ledger.
I find the consumer psychology of this so fascinating. I mean, in the U.S., we have this agonizing, decades-long debate over eliminating the penny.
Right, the zinc debate.
Exactly. Economists scream that it's a waste of zinc, but there's massive emotional resistance from the public. But if a country successfully eliminates small change and prices are no longer exact in cash, it seems like it would just train consumers to think differently about value.
It really does soften the edges of a transaction. It makes money feel a little less rigid.
What's fascinating here is how that subtle shift in transactional psychology cascaded into completely unexpected sectors.
Yes, the charity.
Exactly. The sources highlight this unintended butterfly effect on charities. For years, various nonprofit organizations relied on checkout programs where cashiers would ask customers to donate their exact remaining change.
Right, like rounding up for a cause.
Exactly. But once the rounding rule structurally eliminated small change from cash transactions, that vital stream of microdonations just dried up almost instantly. The physical coins vanished and literally took a major funding model down with them.
Which shows how interconnected the physical form of money is with daily life. But, inflation physically alters the money, but political shifts leave a much more intentional mark.
Oh, definitely. The metal itself becomes like a billboard.
Yeah, precisely.
During the military dictatorship from 1973 to 1990, the 5 and 10 peso coins featured a winged female figure breaking a chain around her wrists.
Right.
And this imagery was placed alongside the word libertad, liberty, and the Roman numeral date of the 1973 coup d'etat. And just to be clear for you listening, we aren't taking any political sides here. We're just looking objectively at the history printed on the metal.
Right, we're just reporting what the sources show.
Yeah.
But as an economic artifact, that is a masterclass in omnipresent state messaging.
Because it's literally everywhere.
Exactly. A government can put up posters or broadcast speeches, but those can be ignored or torn down. Putting a highly specific, ideologically loaded narrative into the pocket of every single citizen ensures the state's version of history changes hands millions of times a day.
Without any friction.
Completely frictionless.
But then the regime falls, right? Democracy returns, and the imagery immediately pivots. The new government swapped out that winged figure for Bernardo O'Higgins, who was one of Chile's founding fathers.
A very deliberate shift.
Very. And then later, in 2001, a Mapuche woman was added to the 100 peso coin to recognize the indigenous heritage of the country. So the physical money evolves exactly as the national identity evolves.
It essentially traces the shifting consensus of who and what the nation wants to project to itself.
Which, ironically, brings us back to that spectacular 2008 blunder I mentioned at the start, the CHIIE coin. The Mint issued a whole series of 50 peso coins with the country's name misspelled. And they didn't officially catch the error until 2010.
2 years later.
2 whole years. So I want to challenge you on the economics of this. If a publicly traded company misspelled its name on its own stock certificates, the market would view it as a sign of profound incompetence, and the stock value would likely tank.
Oh, absolutely.
So why did these 9-cent coins instantly become hoarded, higher value items instead of causing a panic?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the UHIE blunder exposes the underlying mechanics of fiat currency.
Okay, how so?
The peso, just like the US dollar or the euro, it has no intrinsic value. It is not backed by gold in a vault somewhere. Its value relies entirely on a collective psychological agreement that the issuing government guarantees its worth.
So, like, a typo shouldn't inherently ruin the value. As long as the collective population still agrees, it functions as a 50 peso coin to buy, a piece of candy.
Exactly. And the scarcity of the error actually amplified its value. The collective agreement held firm on the baseline purchasing power, but the secondary collector's market added a massive premium for the novelty.
That's wild.
It just proves that the rules of money are entirely reliant on our shared psychology, even when the state apparatus makes a glaring manufacturing mistake.
And speaking of manufacturing, the technology behind the money has completely shifted. They aren't just stamping metal anymore. The banknotes have undergone this massive upgrade.
Right, the move to plastic.
Yeah. The 1,000, 2,000, and 5,000 peso notes moved from traditional cotton paper to polymer plastic. Now, the larger 10,000 and 20,000 notes are still cotton paper, and the mint actually staggers the physical lengths of the bills based on their value.
Yeah, they all share the exact same height, but they increase in length by 7 millimeters as the face value goes up. So the 1,000 note is the shortest, while the 20,000 is the longest.
Which is pretty clever.
It serves a dual purpose. It's a highly effective tactile feature for the visually impaired, and it drastically complicates the manufacturing process for counterfeiters.
But the most surprising detail from the sources for me is that these bills aren't even made in Chile.
Right.
The polymer notes are printed in Australia, and the cotton notes are printed in Sweden. The literal manufacturing of a local economy is completely globalized.
Maintaining the specialized infrastructure required to produce secure, polymer-based currency is prohibitively expensive.
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes far more economic sense for a sovereign nation to just outsource the printing of its money to specialized international facilities than to try to build and update that capability domestically.
So we have the physical evolution and the global manufacturing down. But here's where it gets really interesting. The way everyday Chileans actually talk about this money reveals a whole different layer of economics.
The slang is fascinating.
It's basically its own dictionary. Informal Chilean Spanish has an entirely separate vocabulary for the peso. Nobody says 1,000 pesos, they say Luka.
Right.
500 pesos is a quina. And if you're talking about big money, 1 million pesos is a pelo.
The linguistic endurance here is incredibly noteworthy. The term Luka was actually used for 1,000 escudos prior to the 1975 currency switch.
Oh, wow. So it carried over.
Exactly. The slang outlived the actual currency it was invented to describe and seamlessly attached itself to the new system.
So let's look at the term gamba, which translates to prawn. Originally, between 1933 and 1959, the 100 peso note was printed in a reddish color, so people started calling it a prawn, a gamba.
Makes sense.
Today, a gamba can still mean 100 pesos. But if someone tells you they just bought a brand new computer and it cost them 2 gambas, they mean 200,000 pesos.
Because the listener has to rely entirely on contextual deduction to understand the transaction, you clearly cannot purchase a modern computer for 200 pesos.
Right. It's like if Americans started calling a $100 bill a frog because it's green.
No.
And then decades later, because inflation drove prices through the roof, people start using the word frog to mean $100,000, but only when talking about buying a car or a house.
Exactly.
You have to know the macroeconomic reality of the item being discussed to know what the slang even means.
That phenomenon is essentially linguistic inflation. As the underlying math changes and 100 pesos loses its purchasing power, the public doesn't abandon their cultural vocabulary.
They just adapt it.
Right. They upgrade the benchmark of the slang to represent 100,000. It allows a culture to maintain its unique financial language, even as systemic inflation relentlessly moves the decimal point.
Speaking of cultural artifacts moving out of context, I have to bring up the pop culture crossover from the sources.
Album cover.
Yes. We discussed that 10 peso coin from the Pinochet-era earlier, with the winged angel of liberty and the coup d'etat. Well, in 2007, the rock band Velvet Revolver, featuring Slash from Guns N' Roses, released an album called Libertad.
And the cover art.
The cover art is a stylized illustration of that exact winged angel from the Chilean coin.
Placing a deeply polarizing political symbol from a South American dictatorship onto an American hard rock album is just a massive contextual collision.
It really is. And the best part, Slash admitted in an interview that he chose it simply because he thought it looked cool. He had zero awareness of the heavy political significance behind the image. To him, it was just a striking heavy metal angel.
Which serves as a stark reminder of how rapidly imagery is stripped of its original weight when it crosses borders. A symbol that dictates the localized political reality of millions of people instantly becomes a hollow aesthetic in the global pop culture machine.
And that global machine dictates a lot more than just album covers. It actually dictates the raw value of the peso itself.
Absolutely.
We've seen how inflation shapes the coins and the slang, but what actually drives the value of a Luka on the world stage? The sources trace the Central Bank of Chile's shifting strategies over the decades, and they haven't always let the free market decide.
No, the central bank has utilized several distinct monetary frameworks. In the 1970s and 80s, they employed a crawling band system.
A crawling band?
Yeah. Instead of locking the peso to a single fixed exchange rate or letting it float entirely freely, the government established strict upper and lower limits, a band. The currency was allowed to fluctuate within those predetermined boundaries, which would gradually crawl or adjust over time to account for inflation differentials.
So it gives the market some room to breathe, but the government keeps a leash on it to prevent wild, destructive swings.
Exactly.
They later tried pegging it directly to the US dollar, but since 1999, the Chilean peso has been a free-floating currency. Its value is purely determined by the open market of buyers and sellers.
But a free flow does not mean the central bank abandons the currency entirely. They reserve the right to intervene during extreme volatility.
Like in 2022.
Yes. To understand the mechanics of that intervention, we have to look at the massive crisis that hit the peso in 2022. It was a perfect storm of external macroeconomic shocks and internal domestic instability.
Let's break down those storm clouds because the sources show it hitting from all sides. First, the global price of copper plummeted. Walk us through the mechanism there. Why does a metal market in London or Shanghai dictate the value of a physical peso in Santiago?
Because copper is the absolute backbone of Chile's export economy. When global copper prices drop, international buyers are sending significantly fewer US dollars into Chile to purchase that metal.
Right.
A massive reduction in the inflow of foreign currency immediately weakens the peso's position on the global exchange market. Supply and demand dictate that when fewer foreign dollars are chasing Chilean exports, the peso loses value.
So less foreign money coming in weakens the foundation. Meanwhile, domestically, Chilean inflation hit a 20-year high of 14.1%.
A huge spike.
Add to that a slowdown in China's economy, which buys a massive chunk of that exported copper and intense domestic political uncertainty. Gabriel Boric had just taken the presidency, and the country was facing a looming, highly contentious constitutional referendum.
And financial markets inherently panic at uncertainty. International investors look at falling export revenues, soaring local inflation, and major constitutional question marks, and they initiate capital flight.
They just pull their money out.
Exactly. They start selling off their peso-denominated assets. This aggressive, widespread sell-off resulted in the currency entering a freefall.
It broke a massive psychological and mathematical barrier. The U.S. dollar crossed the 1,000 peso mark for the first time in history, peaking over 1,050.
Which is unprecedented.
That kind of threshold triggers nationwide panic. So what does this all mean? The Central Bank of Chile stepped in with an unprecedented response, announcing a $25 billion intervention program to stabilize the market.
This is where we see the actual mechanics of a central bank defending its national currency on the open market.
My understanding of this intervention is that it basically operates like throwing a massive financial anchor out of a runaway speedboat.
Okay, I like that analogy.
The speedboat is the economy heading for the rocks. The central bank has these huge reserves of U.S. dollars sitting in a vault. When the peso crashes because everyone is selling pesos to buy dollars, the central bank floods the open market with its own billions of U.S. dollars, aggressively buying up Chilean pesos.
That analogy tracks perfectly. By absorbing the excess supply of pesos and flooding the market with highly desired U.S. dollars, the central bank artificially manufactures demand for its own currency.
It catches the boat.
It does.
Yeah.
This massive coordinated purchase intervention forces the value of the peso back up, stabilizing the exchange rate and stopping the panic.
And the anchor caught. By 2023, the dollar dropped back down to around 780 pesos. But the roller coaster kept going, driven by another mechanical lever, interest rates.
Right.
In July 2023, seeing that domestic inflation was finally starting to cool off, the central bank announced a massive interest rate cut, a full 100 basis points, dropping the rate from 11.25% down to 10.25%.
Which was the sharpest rate drop the country had seen since 2009.
And almost immediately after that cut, the U.S. dollar climbed right back up to 860 pesos. Break down the mechanics there. How does cutting an interest rate locally cause the U.S. dollar to strengthen against the peso globally?
It comes down to yield and capital flow. When a central bank cuts interest rates by 100 basis points, the yield on local bank deposits and government bonds drops significantly.
So it's less attractive for investors.
Exactly. Foreign investors who had their capital parked in Chilean institutions suddenly see lower returns on their money. In response, they pull their capital out, converting their pesos back into U.S. dollars to invest in other countries with higher interest rates.
And that causes the drop.
Yes. That massive wave of selling pesos and buying dollars floods the market with Chilean currency again, which drives its value down relative to the dollar.
It really highlights how a free-floating national currency is essentially a live, real-time report card on a country's global standing. It constantly recalculates everything. Local elections, the yield on a time deposit, consumer confidence, and the price of raw copper half a world away. It's all distilled right into the price of a single Luka.
This raises an important question about the interconnectedness of modern economies. You simply cannot isolate a domestic currency from the global supply chain or international monetary policy. They are inextricably linked.
This entire story is just a masterclass in adaptation. We've seen the peso shed its centavos when the raw metal became more expensive than the underlying math. We've seen it evolve into Swedish-printed, staggered-length polymer to fight counterfeiting.
Right.
It survives massive political shifts stamped right onto its face, volatile copper markets, capital flight, and even its own mint spelling the country's name wrong.
As we consider this incredible adaptability, the source material leaves us with a compelling final thought regarding the future. We discussed how the 2017 rounding rule eliminated small change, nudging the public further toward electronic payments. As the global economy marches toward a purely digital reality where cash transactions vanish entirely, what happens to the physical artifacts of a culture's economy?
If the peso becomes fully digitized, there are no more polymer notes to hold. There are no more chains being broken on a coin.
Right. Will vibrant, historically rooted slang like Gamba and Luka survive the transition to a cashless society? Or does a nation's unique financial vocabulary inevitably disappear when the physical cash that inspired it ceases to exist?
Will the words vanish when the coins do? That is a truly fascinating thought to leave you with. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep your curiosity alive, keep looking closely at the ordinary objects in your pocket, and we will be back soon to unpack the next stack of sources.